Welcome to Killer Women with your host, best-selling author Danielle Girard. And now, Danielle's next killer woman.
Hello, and welcome to Killer Women Podcast, a proud member of the Authors on the Air global network with more than 4 million listeners. I am your host, suspense author Danielle Girard, and my guest today is Brandy Schillace. And my bio was hidden. Hello, Brandy. Okay, Brandy is the author of several works of nonfiction, including Mr. Humble and Dr. Butcher and Death's Summer Coat, What Death and Dying Teach Us About Life and Living. The Framed Women of Ardemore House is her fiction debut and the start of a mystery series starring Jo Jones, a neurodivergent, hyperlexic book editor. A former professor of English and Gothic literature, Brandy has an abiding love of mystery. She writes about gender politics and history, medical mystery, and neurodiversity for outlets such as Scientific American, Wired, CrimeReads, and Medium. She's the creator of the Peculiar Bookclub that brings best-selling authors together with their readers. Like Jo Jones, Brandy is autistic, though has not, to her knowledge, been a suspect in a murder investigation. Welcome, Brandy.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And I learned before we started recording that Brandy is not only autistic, she's also hyperlexic, which I think you have to define for our audience. But first, before we get to the nitty gritty, tell our listeners, I loved this book, loved it. Tell us, our listeners, about the Framed Women of Ardmore House.
Sure. So Jo Jones she's had a rough year before you meet her. Essentially, she's divorced and she sort of lost her job in the divorce, which is complicated because it was a publishing house. And her mother gets ill. She takes care of her mother. All this happens before the book starts. But when her mother dies, she finds out she's inherited this property from a side of the family she does not know exists. She's apparently the only person left alive in this family line, and she gets this estate in England, in the Pennine region, which is sort of North Durham, Yorkshire kind of area. And so she has nothing to lose. She decides, okay, I'm just gonna go and see what this is all about. And then she arrives, and the house is falling down, and everything's weird, and she's struggling to kind of connect with people. And then a dead body turns up on the carpet. So it's a whirlwind couple of days. She's not even over the jet lag yet.
Exactly. Well, what I love about her too is that, I mean, literally, she's like a book lover. There's like there's this beautiful room in the top of it's got a hole there's a hole in the ceiling. And as we know, it rains quite a bit over in England. So
Yes.
everything, like most of the books are destroyed. And she says, I love that she's staying at what is she saying at the Red Lion?
Yeah.
I love it. So
Mhm.
she's staying at the Red Lion and she makes friends. Tula is her first friend, who is
Yes.
works at the Red Lion with her boyfriend partner Ben. But
Her man toy.
her man exactly. She's our first kind of like, don't mess with this woman, which I love, because she's an outsider too. Tula is also,
Mhm.
even though she's
Yes.
been there forever, she's also an outsider.
Right.
Okay, first of all, I want to make and we talked about this before we started recording too. If you guys are lovers of Stuart Turton, which you should be if you're not, the 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle and The Devil and the Dark Water, reminds me of those books. And those are some of my very, very favorite cozies. I'm not normally a big cozy reader, but so witty, so sharp. Jo is hilarious. And let's talk about her autism, because with Jo, it's that extra level of, it's really hard to sort of meet people and talk about things. And
Yeah. Well, and so, I also spend a lot of time in Britain, and even though I live in the United States, I did research there as a graduate student. I did a lot of things, and I am about as socially able as like an orangutan, which is the only primate that does not live in groups. So it's a solitary ape. But so I make social faux pas anyway, and I've learned to mask. I've become very adept at things. But then when you have to translate that into another culture, it can be really jarring, especially if it's a culture that also speaks your language, because you get lulled into this false sense of security that you know what's going on. and you don't. And so similarly, she's trying to make friends and she keeps forgetting to do the basics like eye contact or introductions or telling people her name.
Right.
Yeah. And I have to tell you a funny thing. When I wrote the book, the first draft I sent it to my editor, it kind of like I was like, "Oh, that's just too embarrassing." Then they kept saying, "Could you put more of her autistic traits in here?" And I thought to myself, never in the history of autism has any autistic person been asked to be more autistic than we already are. It's always like, could you be less, maybe? So I really just opened it up and let people see what it's like to be inside the head of somebody who's trying really
Yes.
hard
Right.
to make things work. And it does make sense until you see it from outside.
Well, and I think the funny thing about it is too, is like some of those traits are just like a little bit of the discombobulation of being in a new country and
Yeah.
having this property. And then, but then it goes a couple steps further and you think, oh God, like that's, there it is.
Yeah.
That's her, that's her brain. Um, that's her brain working like not her neurodivergence. But, and then this hyperlexicity, is that how you say it? Hyperlexity? Anyway, her
Sure.
hyperlexedness. That makes her like it's a whole other thing, right? I
Yeah.
mean, she
Yeah.
basically, so tell our listeners what that means.
Okay. So hyperlexic is so normally when people are diagnosed with autism, they're diagnosed as children. And that's because it's easier because once you have developed, you're a teenager or whatever, it's much easier. You've learned already like how to hide stuff. You've learned already to be like, oh, don't do that in public, right? So it's much harder to test for. So I was somebody who was not diagnosed as a small child, even though we all knew, but it was like it was I grew up in this I was born in the 70s and it was just it looked frowned upon and people didn't know what to do about it. And so I didn't get a diagnosis until much later. I'm saying that because hyperlexic is something that you diagnose children with usually. It means they learn to talk incredibly early. They're precocious readers. They read well above their grade level. Words are just like meat and potatoes, right? Words are their thing. So that was true of me as a child. I see less talk about what it's like to be hyperlexic as an adult. So so me telling you this is not something I've pulled out of research because I don't see a lot on it. But like, I am a super reader. I review books for the Wall Street Journal,
Mhm.
and they can give them to me like 2 days before before they want the review. I just read them overnight, and then I write a review because I read really really quickly. In fact, I read so fast I don't really read individual words so much as I sort of read a page kind of. It's really hard to explain. Joe tries to explain it and does a bad job for the same reason. Um,
Mm.
because it's difficult. But words have a kind of it's almost like synesthesia in the sense that like words have a shape and a personality and you know, not quite to the point of having colors, but kind of. So it's something that I'm deeply attached to and I remember kind of everything.
Wow.
Uh except names, which is hilarious. So
Ah,
I have like
right.
name blindness, right, which would be super useful, but I can tell you, who died of what in the 16th century. So um, that makes me, I'm a researcher, a science researcher as well. And so I just realized we started this by me giving you weird facts about orangutans. So that's the kind of stuff I do all the time.
That's awesome. I love, well,
Um,
first of all, I followed you. So I don't know what that says about me, but I also feel like I might be about as socially awkward as an orangutan. So, anyway, but I get that 100%. And I do love what you're saying about it, which is that and I don't read like that, which that sounds lovely. But, because of course I'm reading, I have 4 books a month for the podcast, in addition to sort of whatever else I am supposed to read. But but that is interesting that it is like I almost picture it like a sort of 3D experience when you look at a page. That's really fascinating.
kind of, yeah. It's just it's hard to explain, but the one bad thing about it is it does mean I'm an editor as well.
Uh-huh.
So I'm also an editor. I am forced to read much more slowly if I'm editing, obviously, because you
Right.
have to pay attention to every single word. So I have 2 modes, and it's just really important not to get them confused.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. You're flipping through the pages of the things you're supposed to go slow on. That's so interesting. Well, it's fun that Joe has so many similarities to you. I love that. And I love that you spent time, and it feels like you spent time in Britain. It just feels so authentic. And there's so many lovely characters. And I don't want to run through all of them, but I do want to point out that there's two, and I know this is a series, the beginning of a series, which is so exciting.
Yes.
There are two men in Joe's new British life that I think are very lovely candidates for the next book.
Yeah.
So, and I know you know who they are. But there's a detective who I love, McAdams, and his partner, Rachel Green. Am I getting that right?
Sheila Green. Yeah, Sheila
Oh
Green.
yeah. Okay. Her partner is Rachel. So,
sorry.
he is lovely and I think wonderful. And also, it means William, but it's pronounced not Gwillem.
Gwillem. Yeah, that's right. That's pretty good. Yeah, yeah. It's basically the Welsh version of William, Gwillem, and it's spelled strange. And I struggle with spelling it because I always swap the I and the Y.
Yeah, I would too. I mean, I could absolutely see that. Well, the fun thing too is that she does this thing where she's, researching this house and she's really trying to identify. The framed woman has this lovely sort of, double entendre because she's trying to figure out who this woman is in this painting. And she goes, takes a 3-hour train ride to find a guy who sells stuff on eBay. And he's also like a super fun. That's what I mean by these are the Stuart Turton moments where I'm like, that is a character out of, he's so clever. He's so out there. He's so fun. All the characters kind of keep us guessing. And even McAdams, who's sort of he's like, seems like an average detective sort of, but he's not. So it's so fun.
He's an average guy. Yeah, he's our surly sort of cranky, can't quite get his head around this bizarre American woman and that's the other thing is like I get asked with some regularity when I am in Britain, because I run a journal for the BMJ, so I work and I go there, and I had people at the BMJ ask me at one point, they're like, is this an American thing or is this a you thing?
Yeah.
Like, and I could blame it on being American. I'd be like, no, yeah, that's all Americans are. No, that's just a me
But it's
thing.
probably right. It's some combination, but yeah, it's like you're like mostly it's me. I would say you don't want to blame it on being American is not the thing to be these days anywhere. So I would stick with I think you got a leg up from the rest of us. Okay, so I want to talk about this, and I love how open you are about autism, and it's something that we've seen in some TV shows. We occasionally run into it in literature, but it's not very well, and obviously so many people, are diagnosed with autism, and yet our understanding of it, at least the layperson's understanding of it, still seems really vague. So I'm curious about clearly writing Joe Jones felt very authentic to you. I know your editor was like, we want more of that. We want more of that, which I think is lovely because she's so endearing. And also do not mess with her because she remembers everything. She's very smart. She's putting the puzzle together before you even realize that there are pieces. So it's all really, it's super fun and engaging. But what was it like to write the other people? Like, have you spent so much time sort of mimicking neurotypicals?
So, so I don't know if there's a show I like to watch called Resident Alien with Alan Tudyk in it. Okay. If your listeners have seen it, it's an alien attempting to be human and doing it badly. And that is basically what most of my life has been like. So I've had to make this very comprehensive study of human nature. So I sound pretty normal. I think I'm doing a pretty good job. I sound very human today. I'm humaning really well. But like I had to learn this. And so I had to study like, okay, how do these facial expressions or this body language, in what way does that communicate emotion, for instance? Because I have emotions and autistic people have emotions. We're also quite empathetic. We get accused of not being it, but it's just because we don't process or express in the same way. And so I remember as a small child being like, okay, if you're upset, here are the things you do to express, like, okay, they don't get that you're upset, they don't understand. And this is also why autistic children will have meltdowns, because they've actually been trying to tell you something, but it's like it's not working, and then or you just don't see it. So I've learned a lot. So I have an extremely expressive face, because I have intentionally learned all of this kind of stuff to do with your face, to communicate things body language wise. I'm a performer. Um, because all life is performance for me a little bit, but also I am a public speaker and I have done performance. And so that is part of that ability to kind of go, okay, I want to connect with the world really badly. So I need to study them. And I'm a researcher. And so it just seemed perfectly natural for me to read all of you like books.
Right.
So you're just
Right.
all my books.
Right. So you're, yeah, well,
um,
I mean, yeah, so talk about that. I mean, it's like, so basically, did you character sketch these characters? I mean, because they're all very different too. We're not talking about like, one type of human expression, and what McAdams has gone through. I mean, there's lots of layers to them. And
yeah.
What Fleet's gone through, I mean, there's lots of stuff.
People are so multidimensional, and that is true whether you're neurodivergent or neurotypical, whether you have ADHD or autism or none of those things. We're all very multi-layered, and the big difference I think for me is um processing. So for instance, if this is not true, but I'm going to make it true for a minute because it'll make it easier to explain. It's like imagine that you've got circuits coming in and circuits going out of your head. And you've got information coming in and then it needs to get to the other side. And so imagine like you've got red, blue, green, yellow, right, some wires going down, but coming out my other side is like purple, fuchsia. It doesn't match. And so I have to figure out how to translate this
Mhm.
into whatever current needs to come out there. And that is that's true for everyone. Actually, we all do this. We all code switch. We're always doing this all the time. But if you have the kind of the wiring that lots of if a whole bunch of people have very similar wiring, they're not going to have a problem talking to each other because they're all going to kind of understand that input and output.
Yeah.
I just happen to have wiring that's different coming out the other end. But what's fascinating about autism in general, and autistic people, is that it varies so widely.
Mhm.
So you
Yeah.
get a group of autistic. Wonder what the collective noun for that. A group of autistic people together. A confusion. If you have a confusion of autistic people together, no,
Uh,
it's actually not. I think the collective noun for autistic people is special interest. But
but I love
the
it. I mean, I think it's very clever. You should use that in your next book. It's
I
hilarious.
should. So if you get together with a bunch of them, we all go, oh yeah, 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 but not because the wires are the same. We just
Yeah.
get what the mix up is kind of, and we're
Right.
all working on translation. So we're very, very different, and that is wonderful. And there's not a lot of one thing I will say about the autism community is there's not a lot of like, there's none of this, are you autistic enough kind of thing. Everyone's just like, yeah, that's fine. Nobody would admit this if it wasn't true. Um, so anyway, I do understand people. I do. And I work really hard to understand them. And so the way I create characters is the way I kind of I see situations unfold, and then I have to put the people who belong in those situations there. And so rather than being they say there's plotters and pantsers.
Yeah. Yeah.
I wish it was more of a plotter because these are mysteries and plot matters.
Yeah.
But I tend to see the scene and then go, well, the kind of people who should be in this scene, and then they sort of develop from there. And so
Yes.
it's very much a ground up sort of thing. I don't really have, I would actually be really terrible for role playing games, where you have to develop your little
Right.
character because
Super
they get way
fast.
too complicated, and I'd be like,
Right.
that would be the whole game.
Right. You're like, I'm not done with my character yet. Exactly.
Yeah, yeah. It's been
Well,
days.
I love that. Actually, it makes perfect sense to me. And I think in the same way, you exercise muscles that most of us don't exercise that often, right?
Mm.
Which is to try to understand. And we're not that good at it, even with people who are, think the same circuits we do. I think that's a really special thing about where you come from, and probably one of the gifts you bring into your writing, into your speaking, into all the things you do, because because of the autism, you're forced to, and you have learned
Yeah.
to give
Mhm.
everybody a little more like leeway and space and attention on how they're trying to express themselves. And that's, yeah, that's admirable. We all need more of that.
Well, and I also was told by my editor that I managed to write the best drunk people.
Yeah.
So apparently I do really good drunk dialogue, I guess.
I love that. That is true. It's a lot of really good drunk dialogue in there, especially with the sisters. The one sister is very drunk a lot of the
Oh
time.
yeah, I don't
They're
think she's
so
sober the entire book.
Yeah, there is so much fun stuff there. So I noticed in your, I mean, you have a sort of, you mentioned that you're a mystery lover and that, you were a professor of Gothic literature. You have all
Yeah.
these like fun, eclectic interests, and that you appeared on Mysteries of the Museum. I saw that and I was like, okay, where did your love of mystery come from? Do you remember? Like, was it always?
Oh gosh. Things have to make sense, and it makes me insane if they don't make sense. So
Yeah.
about it, if I'm seeing someone's response and they're upset, they're you have to figure out why that is, right? You have to sort out what that means. And I loved mysteries so much that I tend to make mysteries out of things that aren't mysteries. Like I found out that if you read Uncle Tom's Cabin backwards, then you just start at the last chapter and Uncle Tom is dead. And you think, how did Uncle Tom die? And then you read the rest of the book backwards, chapter by chapter, and it becomes a mystery and you solve it at the end. So you can do that with anything in life, really.
That is hilarious. I had not heard that about Uncle Tom's Cabin, but it makes perfect sense, and I understand what you mean. I think I like them for this sort of a similar reason, right? They're a way of making sense of things of things that don't make sense, like death, or murder, or revenge, or all those things that don't really make sense when you put it back, when you put them together with us in a certain sort of situation and you add the gas and light it on fire, well, then it makes sense. And I kind of love that. So
My most recently published nonfiction was Mr. Humble and Dr. Butcher, which sounds like fiction but isn't. Actually sounds like a great murder mystery title, but is nonfiction. And there again, someone came to me and said, you know that time when, because I live in Cleveland, you know that time when that Cleveland doctor swapped those two monkey heads and the monkey lived with a different body? And I was like, what? And so I had to write a whole book about it because I was like, what? What? How? What? No. And
he
so
literally
that
like
sent me,
brain surgery.
yeah. Yeah, he's a brain surgeon. He transplanted the head of one monkey onto the body of another monkey,
Oh,
and it lived. And he was practicing to do it for people. And I was just like, that can't be real. And so, of course, now this piece of information is a problem because I need to know
right,
why.
right,
And then
right.
I wrote an entire book, and it ends up being a history of organ transplant, and it takes place during the Cold War, and like all this crazy stuff happens. And this guy did transplant monkey heads, and it's very weird. Um, and he
Wow.
was good friends with a pope and a lot of other bizarre things that don't make sense. And I ended up having to go to Moscow to research the book. So you just, yeah, if there's I hate things I can't figure out, and I just end up
I love
doing a
that.
lot
So you
of
just
work.
you're like, yeah, and you're doing something productive with it, right? You're not just doing the work, you're sharing it with the world. So those of us, who want to understand that, how in the world that worked with the, switching heads on
Yeah,
monkeys.
that's another autistic trait. We don't just have special interests. We want you to have them too. So
Sharing
the
special
tendency
interests.
yeah, real bad. Uh, my mom used to trot me out at parties when they needed answers to things. I was like a little dictionary. Come out
I
and be like,
love
Brandy,
that.
tell them the thing. But yeah.
Tell them the thing. I love it. So tell us about Mysteries in the Museum. I feel
Oh,
like you were on, yeah, you were on that.
I was on that a couple times. I'm also, believe it or not, I'm right now, this past Friday, in fact, on a show with Dan Aykroyd called The Unbelievable, which is very similar. And Don Wildman is also on the show, The Unbelievable. And I actually just missed him because I went in for filming at A&E and his coat was still there. And I was like, no, because I wanted to shake hands with Don Wildman. But yeah, how did I end up in there? Let's see. I used to work at a medical history museum. I absconded from academia. So I was a professor and then I ran away and I became a museum person. And we had a really weird medical history museum full of strange things like historical contraceptive devices, of which crocodile dung is one, and you won't believe where you
Ah,
put that. But
ah, yeah.
not pleasant, but apparently worked. So anyway, this weird museum had stuff in it and they contacted us and wanted to do a show. And then I did the show and I was incredibly also very weird, apparently. And they were like, well, we should do that again. So I think I've been on three of those. And now I've been on two or three of shows with Dan Aykroyd for The Unbelievable. I do talk about the monkey heads.
I love that. I mean, I love it. You have like such a wide variety of experiences and interests. It's fabulous. I mean,
It's just
really.
enthusiasm for things that are real bizarre tends to get you on TV sometimes.
I would imagine. Well, especially if you're smart enough to, research it and learn about it and be able to talk about it. So
Yeah, there's that too. Yeah.
yeah, there's a little more to it than that. Then I get it. Otherwise, you end up in prison usually. I think if you're just
Well,
interested in.
I always worry about, I mean, you're a writer, you write thrillers, you understand this. My search history in my browser is like, someone should delete that if I die, because it looks
Yeah.
like not good is what.
Yes, it's true. Our search engines they would get us in trouble if we couldn't then
Yeah.
show the proof of what we do. So I think we're
Right, that's true.
well,
I mean, it's like, yeah. Though I will say, I think the algorithms for many search, you know how they want to try and sell you things, the
yeah.
search engines, right? They're very confused because they're like, well, she was looking up syphilis, and now she's looking up poison, and there were elephants, and now there's this whole thing on orangutans. Because I did check into orangutans because I thought, I can't keep referring to myself as an orangutan if I
Unless you
don't,
know enough, right? That makes
unless I know
sense.
enough about it. Yeah. So yeah, if you put all those things together, it'd be a hell of a talk show.
I mean, right. You should have a podcast where you just talk about the sort of random things that you're working,
I kind of do.
investigating. I love it. What is that?
That's the Peculiar Book Club. So even though it's other people's books, but invariably I choose books for the show based on my own particular interest. It's just, most of them are nonfiction. We do some mystery too, but we do a lot of nonfiction. Like Ed Young was on our show,
Fun.
and Carl Zimmer, Mary Roach, who did Stiff.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I have that book
So
on my shelf, actually.
I think everyone has that book on their shelf. But
They
yeah, so
should,
we talk about a lot of weird stuff, and I run it on Facebook. I have a Facebook group too, and because it's called the Peculiar Book Club, I've attracted a lot of peculiar people, many of whom are also, I think, on the spectrum of various spectrums, probably. And so we just get together and be real weird together a lot. So yeah, it's
I love
surprising
that.
how many people are interested in all the weird things.
Of course. I mean, don't you think? Like yeah, I think that makes total sense to me. I don't know why it just completely makes sense to me that we're all that we all have sort of weird fascinations about bizarre things for sure. And that is what we do.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the problem with the search engine thing is that I end up searching a lot of things before I find the thing that I'm actually going to write about. So there's all these things I didn't use, but those would be the ones that would get me in trouble. Well, these aren't in your book. Well, that was how I got to this one. And they're like, I don't see the path. And that makes sense too.
That's
So
true. I can see that. I did a lot of work on cloning for a while there.
That is so
for a book I
great.
didn't write. So
well, yeah, probably don't clone anything would be my yeah. Just
I'm trying not
especially
to. I'd
no
like to clone myself. That would be really handy. Of two of me. Actually, no, it wouldn't, because we would argue.
I was gonna say also like you'd be like, what did you do? Because there'd be things that I would do, and when I, if I wasn't fully on, in my right mind, that would not be good. Okay, but I'm getting, this is so fun. But I know you're in the middle, or you're writing the second book in the series.
I am.
And I know it's a magical time. Sometimes we don't like to talk about what we're working on, but can you give us a tiny taste of what Jo Jones gets up to? And you can say no, because that's fair.
Sure. No, I can give you a tiny taste, because all the characters that you know and love will be back. I can tell you that, as is my hope for the entire series, each one of those quirky characters gets a little bit more of the spotlight in subsequent books. So you will learn more about Tula, for instance, in this next book, and about her. She's quite cagey about her backstory, and so we get a little bit more about Tula. And Jo Jones is still on the trail of some mysteries are solved in the first book, and some go on.
Yes.
And she's still on some trails there, and she finds some new interesting quirky people as a result of those researchers. And we have a new body.
Oh, of course. Well, we have to have a body.
We have to have a body. And Jo has managed to get herself embroiled yet again.
Of course.
And we're McAdams is very frustrated about how this keeps happening.
He's like, could you just stay out of trouble for 10 seconds?
Yeah, he's very concerned about why she can't seem to stay away from people who are murdery.
Murdery.
Yeah,
Right.
murder is murdery, and she just keeps getting involved, and he doesn't know why. And it's very fun to watch him self-destruct over the fact that she's always involved somehow, like, and usually right before he
Right.
gets involved. So it's like,
Right.
if he's going to Newcastle, he'll get there and she'll already be there, Be like,
Right.
how?
Right.
Yes.
I love
So,
it.
and Newcastle and York, which make appearances in the first book, we're back to
Show
that
up
same
again.
nice triune of
Right.
Abington, which Abington is not a real place, but I have an Instagram for Netherley, and I
Okay.
actually do my own artwork. Actually, that's one of my paintings back
I
there.
love that. I've been looking at that. When you move enough, I get to see the woman that's beautiful.
So I do. I've done artwork for the book. So there's pictures of Joe Jones and Gwillem and the detective and Sheila Green, and
Oh my
they are
gosh.
up on
Okay,
my
wait. Tell
Instagram.
us your Instagram handle again.
That is an excellent question. I
It's
believe
like
it's
remembering a name, right?
yeah, I think it's Netherley. I think it's just called Netherley Mysteries. Let me double check here. Yes. Uh it is Netherley. So Netherleigh, which is a word that appears
It does.
repeatedly in that book. And that's, you can find all sorts of fun pictures of
Okay.
the characters,
Yes.
including pictures of the property, which I have also drawn. I don't think I can
I
blow it up
love
big
it.
enough for you to see, but yeah. So
Oh my
there's
gosh. You are very talented.
thank
You're
you.
very talented. That is amazing.
Um,
Well,
yeah, so there's lots of that going
so
on.
go check that out. I'm gonna go follow you right now. This was so fun. I had so much fun with this book, and I do read a lot of dark stuff, so it was fun to read something that was sort of a little bit lighter,
Mhm.
witty, but also another like compulsive read. And I can't. Do you have a title for the second one yet?
I don't. And actually, this title was we knocked around quite a few before we came up with this first one, and I wanted to be just as
Yeah.
intriguingly related to the story. So I hope we'll come up with another good one. The other cool thing about it is you read it, so it's part police procedural and part
Yeah.
sort of cozy, and that's one of the best things about it, because I realized that for me as an autistic person, we either seem to get described, you know, in a book, or the curious incident of the dog in the nighttime. You're never outside of the autistic character's head.
Right.
But but that's not usually where the problem is. The
Right.
problem is when you intersect. So
Right.
having part of the book be from Joe's perspective, and you kind of get in there and go, yeah, that makes sense what she's doing. And then you
Yeah.
see it through another character, McAdams usually perspective, looking back at her going, no, out here it does not make sense. Why are
Yes.
you doing that?
Yes.
So that's the joy of writing the book,
Yeah.
is I get to
I
kind of
agree.
tell both sides of the experience.
And it is real. I mean, it's really fun because I agree with you. Joe makes sense when we're in Joe's head. And I can see also why McAdams is super confused by Joe when we're in McAdams' head. It does. And I think that's the beauty of story. What any two characters, right? Because there's just the perspective difference, but here it's of course a little magnified by her, her autism. And anyway, it was such a fun read. I really can't recommend this enough. Brandy Schillace, nice Italian last name. And this is out February 13th. So you
13th. Yep.
will go grab your copy. It's such a fun book. And I can't wait, Brandy, for book two.
Oh, me too.
I know. You're like, if only it would just finish itself, right?
I've gotten to the end. Now I'm in that, like, I write everything longhand. Did I
Wow.
mention this? I write everything with a fountain pen. So the book is actually sitting next to me here.
I don't know how you do that.
There's,
Oh
there's,
my gosh. Wow.
yeah. So that's I don't think it's going to show up, but yeah,
There you go.
that's
Yep. I see it.
basically, so I have
Yeah,
to type all that up. So that's the other bad thing. I get to the end, but then I'm not really at the end because now I have to
right.
type it.
Yes. Well, but I can imagine you edit as you type, which is what,
I do.
if I make notes and then type them up, that does help me, but I would never have the patience or the finger strength to write the whole thing out
You know
longhand.
what? I can beat a lot of people at finger wrestling. I'll tell you
I'll
what.
bet you
I'm a
do.
thumb
I'll bet
wrestler from way back.
you have very strong fingers. You'd have to. Well, I love that. It was so fun to talk to you today, Brandy.
Thank you
This
so
is
much for
great.
having me on.
Oh, thank you for joining us. Everybody, this is Killer Women with Brandy Schillace. You have to go get The Framed Women of Ardemore House. Such a fun read. And we will see you next time. Bye.
Bye.